Rules Committee will come to order. Good afternoon. Before I go into my formal remarks, I just want to tell everybody who's here and other members that come in. Obviously, we have the White House Christmas party tonight. I know a lot of people are trying to make that with family, so I would ask everybody to just move as quickly as you can so that those who are participating in that event have an opportunity to do so on time with their spouses or whoever they're taking to the event. Our adversaries are evolving their methods and shifting their targets. Gone are the days when direct attacks and military strength were the only things to be feared. A new frontier of aggression is here, and it's one that seeks to subvert our systems and control America through our greatest asset, our own people. We are blessed to be home of world-class institutions of higher learning. Colleges and universities across the nation have continually prepared our brightest thinkers and innovators for the future. It's a fact easily seen in my own district at the University of Oklahoma. Programs on cancer research, climate and weather, petroleum engineering, in combination with competitive athletics have made us a premier destination for young minds. Generation after generation, this harnessing of knowledge and academic excellence has propelled the nation forward. We recognize this, but so do our enemies. And it's why foreign nations, including nefarious actors, have quietly sought to compromise the U.S. campuses. For example, the Chinese Communist Party has actively pushed Confucius Institutes, disguised as seemingly harmless language classes and cultural outreach. The ploy's goal is to indoctrinate students with CCP propaganda. Foreign entities, including our own adversaries, have also increasingly used large donations to American schools to covertly reach and manipulate students. Our reaction to this can't be subtle. It's why the House is taking up H.R. 5933, the Deterrent Act. The bill enhances and brings transparency and clarity to foreign gift and contracting reporting requirements for colleges and universities. No longer will stealthy streams of cash funneled to post-secondary schools be left in the shadows. Imposing stronger safeguards is a vital step forward. Today's hearing also covers H.R. 4468, the Choice in Automobile Retail Sales Act of 2023. The Biden administration's EPA has imposed regulation after regulation to push a radical Green New Deal agenda. One such rule sets emission standards so radical it would result in at least two-thirds of all passenger vehicles sold in the U.S. to be electric by 2023. These emission guidelines defy reality and strip Americans of the ability to make their own purchasing decisions. They also egregiously overlook the dramatically higher costs and a serious lack of charging infrastructure that consumers would face. Americans should be free to choose the type of vehicle that is best for them, not the type of vehicle that faceless bureaucrats in Washington want to think is best. H.R. 4468 will ensure that they can continue to do so. Finally, our last agenda item is the House Joint Resolution 88, a resolution arising under the Congressional Review Act that disapproves of the Biden administration's most recent student loan plan. Held hostage by the approval of progressive voters, President Biden last year attempted to illegally cancel $400 billion of student loan debt. The move was struck down by the Supreme Court, and a mere 10 days later, the White House pushed another scheme. They are now pushing forward the costliest regulations in U.S. history under the guise of cutting student loan repayments. If that sounds contradictory, it's because it is. The math simply doesn't add up. The move is estimated to cost anywhere between $250 to $475 billion, and it's the American taxpayer who will foot the bill. Let that sink in for a second. With the stroke of a pen, President Biden is attempting to spend hundreds of billions of dollars, none of it approved or appropriated by Congress, and all of it that must be borrowed. If allowed to remain in force, President Biden's wildly expensive plan will force Americans who either never attended college or paid for college themselves to bankroll student loans incurred by those who did not. This is not only outrageously expensive and not authorized by Congress, but it's also incredibly unfair. House Joint Resolution 88 would stop this debt transfer and remind the Biden administration that there are limits to their power. The Constitution states that it is us, Congress, that makes laws, not the president. If the president continues to ignore the requirements of the Constitution, it's up to Congress to stop him from doing so. Today, we're doing just that. I now yield to our ranking member, my very good friend, Mr. McGovern, for any remarks he cares to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to keep my comments today very, very brief. Our hearing this afternoon covers three measures. First is H.R. 5933, the Deterrent Act. We can all agree that there ought to be transparency with respect to higher education institutions getting money from foreign entities. Thankfully, the Biden administration worked to improve compliance with existing laws, and as a result, over $1.5 billion more per year have been reported publicly under this president than the prior one. Instead of building on that progress, the majority's bill simply adds onerous new reporting requirements that will make it harder for our higher education institutions and researchers to remain #1 in the world. Second is H.R. 4468, the Choice in Automobile Retail Sales Act of 2023. Yet again, Republicans are putting polluters over people and picking winners and losers in our transportation sector. It is just outrageous that this majority continues to actively fight against innovation, against lower energy costs, and against the private sector making manufacturing decisions based on what people actually want. Finally is H.J. Res. 88, a bill which would block the Biden administration from implementing a new income-driven repayment plan to help save borrowers money. It seems that Republicans are willing to stop at nothing to prevent hardworking Americans from getting student loan relief, and this is just another attempt to attack the Biden administration for addressing the serious financial concerns of low and middle-income student loan borrowers. With that, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to a productive conversation, and I yield back my time.
I thank my friend. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I'd welcome our first panel, Representative Tim Walberg and Representative Scott Peters from the Committee on Energy and Commerce. Representative Walberg, I welcome your testimony.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good to be with each of you, my colleagues. An important bill that I'm glad we have a chance to take up, and affectionately known as the CARS Act, H.R. 4468, the Choice in Automobile Retail Sales Act is what it is. It's led by myself and Congressman Clyde. This bill would ensure Americans, not the federal government, are deciding which vehicles best suit their lives. The bill emphatically provides the necessary and appropriate pushback on the Biden administration's rush to make Americans own electric vehicles, whether or not they can afford them and whether or not they make sense for each American's particular needs. These efforts to remove the dominant engine type used in American vehicles and drive a completely different, limited set of engine replacements is divorced from reality and unaffordable and impractical for most Americans. Importantly, too, by setting emission standards at a level so stringent that it results in a government-dictated retirement of the internal combustion engine, the EPA is handing China the keys to America's auto future. Congress enacted the Clean Air Act to reduce vehicle emissions that endanger public health, not to be used to eliminate specific engine types. The CARS Act stops EPA's proposed rule mandating that 2/3 of all new vehicles sold be EVs. Next, the bill prevents EPA from mandating the use of specific technology in new motor vehicles or issuing rules that result in limited vehicles options based upon the vehicle's engine. In this way, American car buyers, not the government, dictate what features are in their cars, and car company engineers are incentivized to come up with the most appealing, practical, and affordable designs. The language does not limit the EPA from proposing future emission standards. I want to make that clear. It merely allows automakers and the market to determine how best to meet those standards. Access to affordable cars has driven economic success for Americans over a century, especially for low-income families. Unfortunately, even with a 22% drop in purchase price this year and government purchase subsidies, EVs continue to be unaffordable for millions of people, something our nation's auto dealers just told the president. Once you get past the initial high purchase price and high interest rates on your loan, insurance for an EV is $500 more expensive per year than for a gas-powered vehicle. The Anderson Economic Group found that the entry and mid-level electric cars and SUVs cost more to charge at home and in public than it does to fuel a comparable gas-powered vehicle. Most of the country also lacks the charging infrastructure needed for 100% EVs. Notably, Secretary Granholm, former governor of Michigan, displayed this charging shortage when her staff blocked an EV charger for her use while a family with a baby waited for a charge. No matter how much money and subsidies Congress provides, the chargers and the IIJA bought are not being installed. Our infrastructure and our grid are not ready for this dramatic ramp-up of EVs, and it would be irresponsible for us to ignore that. EV drivers generally get around 200 miles from a single charge, compared to gasoline vehicles getting 400 miles per fill-up. An EV range can drop by as much as 40% due to cold weather, battery size, or towing a load. Those stats will not work well in states like Michigan. Forcing Americans to purchase more expensive and impractical EVs would also enable China to pilfer the U.S. auto market. China currently dominates the EV industry and the critical mineral supply chains. It controls some 76% of global battery cell production capacity for electric vehicles, around 75% of all lithium-ion batteries, and much of the processing and refining capacity for over half the world's lithium, cobalt, and graphite. And China is taking steps to build an EV foothold in Mexico, specifically so it can access the U.S. market. Most of China's major auto companies are already well established in Mexico, with plans to continue investing. In conclusion, we cannot allow the federal government to dictate the cars people drive across the country. We cannot hand China the keys to our auto future. This is why I encourage support for H.R. 4468. With this legislation, we can ensure Americans have access to affordable, reliable, and functional means of transportation, which should be a bipartisan goal. I'll never forget the time as a freshly minted member of Congress here, sitting next to my good friend and former colleague, the late John Dingell, as he was explaining the new EPA CAFE standards to Sergio Marchionne, who was the head of then Chrysler Daimler. I'll never forget, after hearing the standards, the CAFE standards, Mr. Marchionne turned to the chairman and said, "Mr. Chairman, thank you for telling me what you want. Now I would plead with you. Just get out of the way. Let my engineers, my designers, and my customers decide how we meet those standards. And Mr. Chairman, we will." That's all we're asking with this legislation here, and I appreciate your consideration and support.
Thank you very much. Representative Peters, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and to Ranking Member McGovern for holding today's hearing on the Choice in Automobile Retail Sales Act of 2023. This bill is a not even very veiled attack on electric vehicles, on efforts to address the climate crisis, the competitiveness of our domestic auto industry, and technological innovation in our domestic auto industry. The bill would block EPA's proposed vehicle emission standard for light and medium-duty vehicles beginning in model year 2027. Emission standards that are required to be set under the Clean Air Act to protect our children from breathing in harmful fumes. According to the American Lung Association, EPA's proposal is expected to avoid 10.7 million lost workdays, 2.2 million asthma attacks, and 89,300 premature deaths. Not to mention, EPA projects the rule will provide $1 trillion in net public health benefits. So for all the talk about costs, you won't hear the majority mention these significant economic and health benefits, benefits that House Republicans' approach would deny the American people with this bill. To be clear, EPA's proposed vehicle emissions standard for model year 2027 is not an EV mandate. As required by the Clean Air Act, EPA's proposal is performance-based, not technology prescriptive. Further, as drafted, H.R. 4468 would effectively prevent EPA from finalizing tailpipe pollution regulations ever again. The bill would require EPA to ensure that future vehicle emission rules do not result in limited availability of motor vehicle engines based on engine type. Maybe that's intended to block EVs, but it could apply to all engine types: hybrid, flex fuel, fuel cell, and even internal combustion engines. It's unclear whether EPA could develop any rule to satisfy this bill's requirements, effectively preventing the agency from ever finalizing vehicle emission standards again, threatening the public health. I think we can all agree that this is an extreme policy position to take. It would stifle innovation, it would harm global competitiveness, cause immense uncertainty for our domestic auto industry, who are our vital partners in driving innovation in the transportation sector. And finally, the bill would actually require EPA to go back and revise all past vehicle emission regulations to ensure they comply with these vague metrics. H.R. 4468 would imperil consumer choice and send a signal to the auto industry and the world that the U.S. wants no part of the EV industry, ceding our global clean energy leadership to our competitors, including China. So as we head into global climate talks at COP28, the contrast between Republicans and Democrats here in the House could not be clearer. We Democrats are showing the world we are serious about combating the climate crisis by promoting domestic manufacturing, spurring innovation, and prioritizing economy-wide emissions reductions. Meanwhile, the majority continues to repeal critical programs and incentives, or attempt to repeal critical programs and incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act, using the Congressional Review Act to block important climate regulations, and fear-mongering against clean technology that can drive jobs and innovation here in the United States of America. The bill does nothing to protect consumer choice, but instead jeopardizes decades of progress in cleaning up our air to keep our communities healthy. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, the chair will forego its questions at the moment, and I turn to my good friend and vice chair of the full committee, or actually I should say Dr. Burgess from Texas.
Well, I want to thank our witnesses for coming in and presenting this to us. It does seem like a straightforward consumer choice argument that we've heard before on some of the things that have been considered. I do wonder why the hybrid technology is ignored in favor of full EVs. And it does seem like, 2003, I was a brand new freshman. I sat in a science hearing and heard about this new hybrid technology. I investigated it. I got on the waiting list to get one of these new cars in 2004, and it's what I've driven ever since. So now, with a gas electric hybrid vehicle, I go to the gas station, fill up. The little indicator says I have 640 miles to drive before I have to fill up again, and it's only a 9-gallon tank. So it seems to me to be pretty powerful if you would let the consumers make those choices. I think we'd come up with better answers rather than constructing these transfer payments that we always seem to do. But I really have no questions. I thank both gentlemen for being here today, and yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Now I turn to my good friend, gentlelady from Pennsylvania, for any questions she may have. Okay, thank you. I'll now turn to my good friend, gentleman from Pennsylvania, for any questions he may have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too am going to yield back for the sake of time.
Wow, this is a lot of pressure on you. The gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for any questions she may have for the panel.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for presenting. I really do want to thank you for highlighting the health effects that we're seeking to address and the costs related to that. So I thank you for that summary, as well as the impact that these CRAs have where they would prevent us from regulating on anything. So thank you for pointing that out, and with that, I will yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may have for the panel.
And Mr. Chair, very, very briefly, I appreciate Dr. Burgess talking a little bit about the flex fuel and the hybrids, and I actually drive a flex fuel car, and that's my consumer choice, and I think this bill is about consumer choice and making sure we have those opportunities, and with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
I'm glad to see we're taking legislative action on this. We had the Secretary of Transportation in the T&I committee, and I asked him if he understood the impact on our grid of putting this many vehicles all electric all of a sudden, and he didn't. I said, what's your plan for upgrading the grid? And it was wishful thinking. The reason I know about how much electricity these consume in your household is my house off the grid runs on solar panels, and I've been charging my Tesla there for a decade. But it turns out it uses a lot more power than air conditioning to charge your car. So although I'm actually a fan of electric cars, I'm just not a fan of mandates. I think we do need choice. I think when it makes economic sense, it will be the optimal thing. And when you try to push stuff like this in advance of consumer adoption or in advance of the other technologies being able to come online, then what you do is you cause hardships with consumers. And I don't think we should be doing that, causing hardships. I think we should have choice. I'm a fan of electric cars, but I hate mandates. And I'm not a science denier either, and you just can't deny that many electrons can't flow through those transformers that exist right now if everybody was driving one of these as their primary vehicle, or not everybody, but the number of cars in here. So with that, support the underlying bill and yield back.
The gentleman from South Carolina, my good friends, recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman. You know, to date, EV sales make up 6.5% of the U.S. auto market. The average time for a EV to sell is 94 days as opposed to 64 for a combustible engine. As Thomas mentioned, a Tesla Model S battery requires the energy usage equivalent to 50 homes. This administration has put $2.5 billion for EV batteries to General Motors, $9.2 billion for EV batteries to Ford Motor Company. They're not selling, they're stacking up, and this is when government is gone awry with interfering in this market. And guess where most of the batteries are made? One of the main made countries are China, which is not got our best interest. This is a great bill. It's insanity what this administration is doing. So thank you for both of you testifying. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Now recognize my good friend from the great state of Texas for any questions he may have for the panel.
Well, I thank the chairman. I assume the chairman would like to talk about college football, but we'll instead focus on the issue at hand. But the question here, I would say, for me, I'd associate myself with the remarks from the gentleman from Kentucky. And I would just appreciate you guys coming in here, especially as we don't have votes tonight, to present the legislation. But just a couple questions. First, Mr. Wahlberg, do these sound correct to you roughly that currently we're seeing new car costs of $50,000, which are nearly double where they were about 10 years ago. Car loan payment defaults are at a 30-year high. The average EV costs about $16,000 more than its internal combustion engine counterpart. Just yesterday, the Wall Street Journal published an article titled "Why Repairing Your EV is So Expensive," a story about a dent on his Rivian electric pickup truck cost $22,000. It took 2.5 months to fix. And sorry if that's repeating anything that was offered earlier. The dealers right now have them piling up on lots because the American people aren't getting them. I understand that even if you are a supporter of all this, you say, well, that's why we need the infrastructure. We just put out $8 billion to go fund the infrastructure, and it hasn't been deployed. Then to the extent that you can do it, to the extent that my friend from Kentucky is correct, you're basically, the cost of doing that is the air conditioner for your home. Then you've got, a story I was reading, some people in Alaska talking about the extent to which they've got a battery-powered vehicle. It takes the entire charge of a Tesla to de-thaw the vehicle in the Arctic cold in Alaska. Then you've got the same situation in North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, et cetera, where you got people that are saying, look, I don't want to die in the freezing cold. And look, all of this is fine if it's choice. right? This is the point. My friend from Kentucky, perfectly fine having a Tesla vehicle, driving to Kentucky, can choose to stop and charge it wherever the gentleman chooses to charge, and hopefully not have the Secretary of Energy come in and push him aside and push aside a mom with a baby and say, sorry, I got a photo op I need to do. But the issue here is not just saying all of the above approach, as my former boss, Governor Perry, talked about in Texas. The all of the above approach is if the market is driving it, and you say, let's put this out there. But now we're saying to people that by 2032, 2/3 of automobiles must be electric vehicles. That is an astounding disregard for the well-being of the American people. An absolutely unbelievable display of hubris by government leadership, forcing people into poverty, forcing people to be unable to actually go about their lives, get jobs, be able to take care of their families with vehicles that are more expensive to maintain, may not serve their function if they're in the freezing cold in North Dakota, may not serve their function in other capacities, putting aside all the side costs, putting aside the battery materials, putting aside the child labor around the world that produces the materials for not just solar panels, batteries, and so forth. I just wonder if the gentleman could expand on the extent to which this will be destructive of the American industry, but also in favor of China and some of our competitors and adversaries around the globe. But importantly, what this means to the average American family. I know you spoke about it before, but this is just, it merits fixating on this. This is not just something you just pass and go, oh, isn't this nice? Got a rule that the administration is trying to dictate through fiat from the executive branch without input from Congress to just dictate all these automobiles. And guess what? The supply chains mean that starts now. If this rule goes into place, it's purposeful, and it happens now. We bankrupt families, and we give them the inability to have the automobiles they need to care for themselves and their families. I wonder if the gentleman could expand on that.
Yeah, I'm just looking for a few things that you didn't cover. That was an expansive list you put together there. And I think, you hit on the key costs that will be brought in, not only for the original purchase price, when you figure how long it takes to get to a place where an EV will surpass what an internal combustion engine is for cost. It's about 10 years and a minimum of 28 to 50,000 miles. But I think when you're talking of the environment concerns as well, about health concerns, right now, Michigan, not even putting into place of what California has to care for and taking out what's coming across from China in the air. Michigan, 8% of what we have to clean up in our air comes from China, who is ultimately going to benefit the most from having EVs. And what they're doing is producing more and more greenhouse gas, more coal-fired plants to build up their energy capabilities for their manufacturing. So when you add all that cost to it, plus 500,000 tons of ore, the various types of ore that goes into a battery, it takes 500,000 tons. Think how much greenhouse gas, carbon exhaust that comes out of all of that to build one battery.
So I agree with that. And Mr. Peters, I'll try to ask this, not like in a gotcha way. I'm just trying to figure out, from California. And, Governor Newsom, I think last year in that heat wave, was quoted as saying, we're not saying don't charge your EVs. We're just saying please don't charge them between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. And I guess my question is when that's what we're doing to the average family and worker, like, what do they do? What do they say? I mean, that's my predominant concern here is like we would have to produce 50% more electricity, I'm told, different studies, different reports, I get that, than we do right now if we converted all our cars to EVs, right? And so it's some massive amount, which we're doing heavily by wind and solar, which has obviously significant reliability concerns and impacts. We're not producing nuclear, which would be the most reliable power that doesn't generate CO2. And so I'm just trying to figure out how on earth we can have a mandate that within 8 years, and the supply chains start now, that we convert the whole world to 2/3 EVs and not see that that's going to destroy productivity in the American family and the hard worker. So I'm just curious the perspective on that, we should be checking the administration on this one.
Well, thanks, Mr. Roy. It is, the rule is not a mandate. The rule is an emission standard. And it allows people to, if you can comply with the emission standard, you can sell any car that complies with the emission standards. It doesn't require you to buy an EV. I would just say, too, one of the discussions here I hope we will follow up on is that we expect that there are a lot of reasons why load growth is going to grow a lot in the United States for electricity. We need to improve the grid. We need to make it more reliable, more secure, and I'd like to work with you on that. I'm also trying to promote permit reform to make all these investments go faster. So I think there's lots of reasons to be concerned about the grid, but load growth is going to be something that we all be concerned with, and it's a larger issue than just EVs.
Well, Mr. Wahlberg, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, about what we just articulated. And I mean, the EVs have an average range of 234 miles in a single charge, while the average gasoline-powered vehicle can drive 403 miles with a full tank. And you can, by the way, go get gas and keep going. And so that's a real concern. Meanwhile, we're going to say to people, as Gavin Newsom did in California, sorry, you can't charge your cars during this window, or we're asking you not to. Meanwhile, an electric car will generate just 23% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than a gasoline-powered car when you take it in totality, how we're getting our power. And if every car on Earth were electric, that translates to a mere 1.8% decline in total emissions. Maybe that's accurate, not accurate. We can go or have a debate about statistics. But the fact is, we know from everything I've read, it's a minuscule impact on the relative production of emissions compared to the, for example, 1,100 coal-fired plants in China that they're building 2 a week on top of it. Does the gentleman have any additional thoughts?
No, you're absolutely right. When my colleague says this isn't a mandate,
Right.
I'm not sure how you can say it's not a mandate when the only way you can meet this aggressive mandate or aggressive standard, EPA, is by not having anything except electric. But then assuming that you don't add all the other costs, the emission costs of producing the batteries, of mining the minerals, of transporting it. And then what do you do after it doesn't work anymore? And you got to have another battery put in and the costs that go there as well. So this is far different than the EPA in the CAFE standards that John Dingell and Sergio Marchioni and I were talking about, where it ultimately mandated better catalytic converters. But it didn't mandate the shape of the catalytic converter, the type of the catalytic converter, and it certainly didn't mandate the car. And that's what's taking place here. And I would also add, as a test case, California, we look at California as pushing and mandating very similar approach to going to electric vehicles. But right now, EVs, as of 2022, only 2.61% of all cars in California. Gasoline hybrid, not going to yours, are 4.76% of all cars. And they're being bought by people who say this will work for us, and it meets both of our needs. But gasoline-only cars are still 89% of what Californians purchase as well. So going back to what people want, what people need, what we can produce to meet these concerns, I think a mandate is the wrong direction.
And am I correct that a group of nearly 4,000 automobile dealers sent a letter to President Biden saying, hey, hold on, these things are piling up in our lots?
Yeah, 38,000.
Right.
That's not quibble.
And so then we had, and not that I'm going to be a proponent of wanting to talk about taxes, but to the extent that this has a significant impact on the Highway Trust Fund, right, I would assume that's at least something we got to consider, that when you've got vehicles that weigh about 33% more than their gas-powered counterparts, wear and tear on the roads, but then you've got, they're not paying a single dollar in the gas and diesel taxes that fund the highways, that's going to take a whole other transition in a way of thinking about how we handle the funding of the highways. Again, not advocating for more taxes, but here we're subsidizing these vehicles that then won't provide revenue, and we're subsidizing the vehicles, for example, to the extent that they're going to people who make over $100,000 a year. That's who's getting the subsidies. Any other thoughts on that?
That's correct.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Now I recognize my good friend from Colorado for any questions he may have for the panel.
I think the thank the chairman and thank Mr. Peters and Mr. Wahlberg for their testimony and appearing before the committee, and I'll keep my remarks brief. Would just simply say that obviously, you know, Mr. Wahlberg, we have a difference of opinion as it relates to your bill and the efficacy of the rule that has been promulgated for all of the reasons that Mr. Peters articulated. I guess I'd like to zero in on a broader issue that my colleagues here on this committee know I often bring up, which is the prioritization of what we consider on this committee and as a body in the House. Long-winded way of saying, this, I understand, is this your first appearance before the Rules Committee this year? Have we been here
No,
before?
it's
I
not.
can't.
No.
It's not. What bill were you here prior on? Do you recall?
Oh, I forget which one it was. I've been here numerous times.
All right. Well, I would simply suggest that as I consider the bills that have been passed by the House, this 118th Congress, that have been ultimately approved by the Senate, and that have been signed by the President, I am left with the distinct impression that this will go down as one of the least productive Congresses in the history of our country. And that impression is backed up by the data. You'd have to go back to the early 1930s to find a Congress that has been more productive than this particular Congress. And the reason why I am focused on this and wanting to engage with you a bit, Mr. Wahlberg, on this topic is because I think we all know, notwithstanding your feelings about this particular bill and your passions and my position on this bill is not going to become law, right? I mean, you clearly know this bill won't become law. The Senate's not going to pass the bill. The President has already issued a threatened veto of the bill to the extent that the Senate were to pass it. So this is not going to ultimately become law. Fair enough? I understand you disagree with that outcome, but I don't, you're not here to tell us that you think this is going to be signed into law. What about the party line vote out of committee suggests to you that this is going to be signed by President Biden?
I work on the optimistic principle that good legislation ultimately wins people over, and I've seen that. I've seen that even in this Congress. So.
Okay, well, you are more optimistic, I think, than the facts should suggest in this scenario. And the reason why I say, Mr. Wahlberg, because I've looked and I know you have shepherded and championed bipartisan pieces of legislation in the past. You've worked with your colleagues and on a wide range of subjects to get bills across the finish line to the President's desk for his signature. And I think you know, given that experience, that this bill clearly is not going to have that same fate. And I would simply suggest to you something that I have suggested to my colleagues here on this committee, which is I'd like to be able to actually consider bills that we believe will ultimately become law. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's do the hard work of legislating, of governing, of working together to find a resolution. This isn't it. And it's why, at the end of the day, we find ourselves in a Congress that's the least productive since 1931, right? Since the days of Herbert Hoover and the Great Depression. That's the last time that a Congress was as unproductive as this Republican-led Congress is today. I'd like to find a way out of that logjam. And both of the members, I think, sitting before us today in the Rules Committee happen to be people who work on a bipartisan basis with their colleagues. So I would just suggest to you, I hope, the next time the Speaker or the leadership comes to you with a request to come before the Rules Committee on another bill, because, of course, we love hearing from you, that perhaps you suggest to them, you know what, maybe we can go with this other bill that actually has bipartisan support that we think can get across the finish line, because I know you have many of them, and I'd love to take those up, and not one that I know is just not ultimately going to be ready for prime time. So with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman. I thank both gentlemen for their time.
Thank the gentleman. Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized for any questions she may have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Representative Wahlberg and the ranking member for testifying here today. I believe my colleague from Texas, Mr. Roy, covered most of the concerns that, and questions that I had laid out. Mr. Wahlberg, I appreciate you answering those questions about affordability and reliability, as well as continued reliance on China with respect to EVs. I support the legislation, and I appreciate you bringing it forward. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Good friend, gentleman from New York, is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here with us today. I'd like to take a quick step back here for a moment to look more broadly at how the EPA has operated or chosen not to operate under the statutory guidelines of the Clean Air Act. I think that the multi-pollutant emission standards rules that we're discussing here today is emblematic of a larger weaponization of the agency to advance radical causes at the expense of fulfilling its actual basic duties as set out by Congress. The EPA has consistently done this by stepping out of its authorized lane and attempting to force its wishes on the American people without the authority to do that. The Clean Air Act directs the EPA to reduce pollutant emissions from vehicles themselves and not force a monumental shift towards an alternative transportation technology through stringent emission standards. So in theory, the EPA could mandate the use of mass transit to achieve emissions reductions, but such an effort would clearly be beyond its statutory authority. Representative Wahlberg, can you discuss the negative consequences of the EPA exceeding its statutory authorities as set out by Congress in carrying out sweeping new policies like the one we're discussing here today?
Well, the EPA regularly misses its deadlines for things that they already have priority and responsibility for. To put this in place at this point in time, when automatically 60% of new cars in 2030 and 7% in 2032 would be required to meet these standards, that goes beyond, as we figured, 17% higher than the president's campaign promise or called for in his executive order. So this is a EPA that, in a sense, has gone rogue, establishing a virtual mandate, if we can use that term, a virtual mandate that can't be met by anything except a vehicle itself. It won't work for most of the people. That's a major concern.
Thank you. And Representative Wahlberg, not only are these emission standards outside EPA's authority, they were promulgated by people who seem to be willingly ignore real-world impacts on these policies. As my colleagues have pointed out today, in colder weather areas, battery performance can be decreased by as much as 40%. Add on top of the fact that EVs have a limited towing capacity, and you have a vehicle with a performance that is substantially worse than the nameplate performance. In my district, it's both cold, and we have vast agricultural footprint. This proposed rule would mean farmers of all varieties that rely on pickups for farm work would be severely impacted by the proposed actions. Representative Wahlberg, in your view, would the EPA's proposed rule, if finalized, result in harm to the future of the American agriculture industry, and would it put farmers and ranchers at the mercy of unreliable and unaffordable forms of transportation?
Thanks for asking that question. My district is heavily agriculture. They would like the F-150 for charging between the next Farm Bureau meeting and their farm, because it's fun to drive. I've driven it myself. But due to the work that they need to do, haul the trailers, cover the miles that their acreages need day in and day out, it just won't work. They're very concerned about this, and it goes away, especially in the sense of the fossil fuel industry with corn growers. They would like to see a means by which we can clean it up. They think they can with ethanol, as opposed to mandating something that will take away what they have in place, what they can work on, and what works best for their industry.
Thank you. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I hear many of the same concerns from my growers and farmers in my district. Affordability, reliability, and consumer choice, they have got to be at the heart of our country's energy future. Thank you for your leadership on this legislation. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor, and I look forward to its consideration on the floor. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I want to thank both our witnesses for testifying today, and both gentlemen are excused.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you at COP 28.
It's a Thursday on a plane, right?
Thank you. I would like to welcome our second panel, Chairwoman Virginia Fox, Ranking Member Bobby Scott from the Committee on Education and Workforce. Chairman Fox.
There's a traffic jam here, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for being here. We're moving with unusual speed today because we have members that want to go to the White House Christmas party tonight. So, again, I
Don't
thank.
have to worry about me.
Well, I just thank both of you for being here in a timely fashion. I appreciate it. But Chairwoman Fox, you're always an old friend here, having served in this committee for many years, so I would welcome your testimony.
Okay, Mr. Chair. 1 second here. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for members, the committee for being here. It's no secret America's colleges and universities are on a downward spiral. At home, the Biden administration is pursuing an unlawful free college agenda. Abroad, foreign adversaries are peddling nefarious influence schemes at our research institutions. Both legislative measures that I'll speak in support of today work to address these concerns. The first measure is Congressional Review Act, CRA, resolution to overturn the Biden administration's reckless income-driven repayment IDR rule, known as the Saving on a Valuable Education, SAVE, repayment plan. We can all agree the federal student loan system is broken, but this scheme will only further exacerbate the problems of rising college costs and excessive borrowing. Experts estimate that the SAVE Act will cost taxpayers as much as $559 billion, making it the costliest regulation in U.S. history. The reality is the Biden administration and its allies are using backdoor free college policies to enact their socialist fantasies and curry favor ahead of the next election, all at the expense of the American taxpayer. Democrats always talk about fairness, but there's nothing fair about the 87% of Americans who don't have student loan debt taking on the debt of the 13% who do have loans. That's why I urge the passage of this CRA resolution to stop the Biden administration's illegal scheme and send a strong message to the administration that Congress will not tolerate a dictator-in-chief. The second measure is H.R. 5933, the Deterrent Act, which brings much-needed transparency to the financial ties that our universities have with foreign entities. While it's not uncommon for American institutions to have research and financial partnerships with foreign institutions, we know that our adversaries like the Chinese Communist Party often hijack these legitimate partnerships to undermine our nation's interests. A new report from the network Contagion Research Institute found that at least 200 higher education institutions withheld information on $13 billion in contributions from foreign regimes. Of course, this number is certainly just the tip of the iceberg. Without transparency, we have no idea the true amount of the use of these foreign funds. That's unacceptable and the reason we must pass the Deterrent Act. This bill holds institutions accountable by slashing the foreign gift reporting threshold for colleges, especially for adversarial nations like China, Russia, and Iran. It also closes reporting loopholes that have allowed institutions to skirt the rules. Most importantly, however, this bill puts in place strong enforcement mechanisms that will lead to greater accountability, like pulling Title IV funding for institutions that refuse to comply. The bottom line is that the Deterrent Act will keep our adversaries at bay and hold our institutions to a higher standard. With that, I urge passage of the Deterrent Act, and I yield back.
I thank the Chair, and it's my pleasure to welcome my good friend, Ranking Member Scott, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Cole, and other members of the committee. I speak in opposition to both bills. I'll begin with the H.J. Res. 88, the Congressional Review Act on saving on a valuable education plan. Last August, the Department of Education launched the SAVE Plan, a new generous income-driven repayment, or IDR plan, to significantly lower monthly payments for many low-income and middle-income borrowers. It also provides loan forgiveness earlier for low-balance borrowers than other IDR plans. Approved applications allow borrowers to have their income securely assessed through the Internal Revenue, so they don't have to recertify their incomes or reapply for IDR plans each year. Moreover, the balances will not grow due to unpaid interest. Repealing the SAVE Plan will be extremely disruptive. Millions of Americans have already enrolled in this program. In fact, the Department released last month that 5.5 million borrowers have already enrolled. Those 5.5 million borrowers already enrolled in SAVE include millions who will have significantly lower payments. There are other challenges that we have in higher education that demand our attention. For example, students and families face a student debt crisis thanks to rising costs of attending college and the chronic state disinvestment in higher education. In fact, between 2008 and 2018, states spent on average 13% less per student after adjusting for inflation. And the buying power of the Pell Grant has also fallen dramatically from covering nearly 80% of the cost of tuition, room, and board at a public four-year institution in 1975 to now covering less than one-third of that cost. Students continue to grapple with mental health problems and substance abuse challenges, yet here we are, wasting our time on a resolution that not only will make it harder for Americans to afford college, but also it has no chance of passing. Last month, the Senate took up the similar resolution, and it failed. Bottom line is we're responsible for strengthening support for those seeking a college degree, not because everyone should be forced to get one, but because those who want a college degree should have access to that opportunity. As President Johnson noted, the higher education should be an opportunity afforded to everyone in this country who can qualify for that endeavor, not just for the wealthy few. So repealing the SAVE Act does nothing to make higher education more affordable or accessible, and I strongly urge my colleagues to oppose this resolution. I also speak in opposition to H.R. 5933. The historically collaborations with global partners and careful federal investments in research have enabled our universities to make bold, forward-thinking strides in health science and technology for people around the world. Additionally, institutions have collaborated with the U.S. government to enhance our research ecosystems by attracting and retaining researchers and scholars from around the country, from around the world. These partnerships help drive intellectual and campus diversity, strengthen the inner workings of our economy, and give us an undeniable competitive edge. Institutions, however, must be transparent about the resources they receive from foreign entities, particularly as the federal government invests nearly $30 billion annually in our higher education's research and development efforts. However, H.R. 5933 does nothing to meaningfully protect research security at colleges and universities. This proposal will not only make it harder for institutions to be transparent about their foreign partnerships, it will also require faculty to report on any gift, even coffee or donuts, from a representative of a country of quote-unquote concern, and it would force them to deviate from the established compliance and reporting guidelines set forth under Section 117 of the Higher Education Act. Schools are already grappling with recruiting and retaining students and scholars, and if passed, H.R. 5933 will stall decades of innovative progress and jeopardize global research initiatives. Students and faculties are calling on Congress to help improve our higher education system and address discrimination on campuses. Unfortunately, certain provisions of this bill would only exacerbate the ongoing culture wars that have consumed my colleagues in this Congress. For example, legislation singles out partnerships with certain countries targeting researchers based solely on their nationality. I've said before, we can achieve accountability and compliance without contributing to anti-Asian, anti-Semitic, or Islamophobic animosity. I've offered a thoughtful alternative to improve Section 117 compliance and support institutions as they evaluate and implement their research integrity and foreign influence policies. My amendment builds on the CHIPS and Science Acts and the Presidential Memorandum on Government-Supported Research and Development National Security Policy Guidelines. And specifically, it aligns reporting requirements to those of federal agencies and requires the Secretary of Education to go through negotiated rulemaking to address key implementation aspects of Section 117. So we must take targeted and thoughtful steps to protect our research and develop initiatives without jeopardizing global partnerships that benefit us all. Mr. Chairman, I have several letters I'd like entered for the record, and I'd just like to quote from one from the Asian American Scholar Forum, where they say that as a practical matter, this act would force scholars and researchers to scrutinize the immigration status of potential collaborators and would deter them from collaboration with individuals who may be perceived as immigrants. Moreover, many scholars would not have access to private information such as immigration status of their peers, making this practically a difficult or impossible requirement for faculty, scholars, or researchers to meet. Additionally, the reporting requirement for contracts of no monetary value as it pertains to foreign entities and countries of concern would significantly chill even normal everyday communications as it may be perceived as an agreement.
Without objection, the documents are entered in the record.
Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman very much. Again, in the interest of time, as much as I'm tempted, I'll forego questions and comment, and I would turn to my good friend, the Vice Chair of the full committee, Dr. Burgess, for any questions he has for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll follow your lead. I am tempted, but I will, in the interest of time, I'll yield back.
Recognize my good friend, the ranking member of the full committee.
Well, let me follow suit. I just want to say, Bobby, I agree with what you said, and I associate myself with your remarks. And Virginia, it's great to see you.
Thanks,
I yield
Mr.
back my time.
Now recognize my good friend from Pennsylvania
I'll take that as a compliment.
for any questions he may have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the interest of time, I too am going to yield back.
I recognize my good friend, gentlelady
We
from
picked up a
Pennsylvania,
good
for any
time to
questions she
go.
may have. Okay, and I would recognize the gentleman from Kentucky for any questions he may have.
I'm actually going to go on with the trend here, although I had some questions for my good friend Bobby Scott. I'm going to yield back.
Okay.
I'll ask him personally.
And now recognize my good friend from Colorado for any questions he may have.
I do have a couple of quick questions, and I will apologize for breaking the trend, but
It's between you and your ranking member.
I know, as he's dutifully reminded me, so I will keep it very brief. I do have to just, to the ranking member and to the chairwoman, thank you both for being here. Thank you for your testimony. I just want to talk a bit about the student loan rule. Madam Chair, certainly respect your position, but I was a bit surprised by, I wrote the phrase you wrote down, or phrase rather that you used to describe this loan program. It was, quote, unlawful free college agenda, end quote. And part of what I'm struggling is trying to find where within this regulation that characterization would fit. And here's why. So just by way of example, my understanding of the program changes is that under the existing income-driven repayment program, the IDR, essentially a borrower would have 10% of their income, or rather, they would have to pay 10% of their income, and it would be classified at excess of 150% at poverty level, right? That's the baseline in the existing program today. And what the Biden administration is changing is essentially dropping that to 5% of income and then increasing the poverty level calculation to 225%. Is that generally accurate?
It is, but what will result in the income-driven repayment plan, we believe, is that only 22% of borrowers will actually pay back fully their loan. That is a very, very low percentage of people paying back their loan, and loan balances will be forgiven as early as 10 years instead of 20 to 25 years, which is done now. You know, we don't want to make college and university educations inaccessible. They're very accessible now. The problem we have is that many people that the cost of college is going up in direct proportion to how much money the federal government, that is, the taxpayers of this country, are putting into these programs. And by doing this, you're simply going to continue to drive up the cost of education. So we want the responsibility to be fairly borne by the people who borrow the money and benefit from it.
I thank you, Madam Chair. And what I would suggest, and I want to give the ranking member an opportunity to opine in here as well, I understand the argument that you're making, and I'm simply suggesting that the mechanics of this particular rule that the Biden administration has promulgated, I don't think could be accurately described as a free college agenda. When most of the changes that the Biden administration is pursuing, let me just give you an example. One of the changes within this rule is enabling a borrower who files their taxes separately from their spouse from not having their spouse's income used to calculate their expected repayment amount. That's a practical common sense change that a lot of members of Congress on a bipartisan basis have called for. Another change, just to give you an example, again, this is within the body of the rule, is that it would extend forbearance for those borrowers who enter into military service, for those borrowers who are undergoing cancer treatment, for those borrowers who are impacted by a natural disaster. That's one of the changes that the Biden administration has proposed in this rule. And to the extent there is forgiveness, as you said, it's a modification from existing programs, again, depending on the income levels, but it is not wholesale cancellation. Of course, we entertained a resolution about that particular issue earlier this year, but this isn't it. And so I would just say that I think this is a common sense way to ultimately ensure that Americans are not weighted down. You're talking about individuals who are raising a family, trying to afford groceries and pay their heating bills, that they're not weighted down unnecessarily by a large loan payment. So with that, I'll give the ranking member a chance to respond, and I think.
Well, I think we have a fundamental disagreement on our committee. I believe in the signing statement, when President Johnson signed the Higher Education Act, he said that it meant that any student from any state could apply to any college or university and not be turned away because the family is poor. Since then, the value of the Pell Grant is eroded, and the only way students can go to college now for a huge portion of them is by incurring crushing debt. That, in my judgment, is unfair. This allows those to pay what they can afford on the college debt for 10 to 25 years, but there ought to be some end to it. The president has a reasonable proposal to help people get into college, and once they have incurred the debt, be able to reasonably pay it back.
Thank you.
Gentleman, gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may have. Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for any questions she may have for the panel.
No, I associate myself as well with the comments of the ranking member and the goal of making sure that education is affordable for everybody, which was the goal both of when this started and with this rule. And with that, I yield back.
Thanks, gentlelady. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel. Gentleman from Texas is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
Yield back.
Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized for any questions.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
And gentleman from New York is now recognized for any questions he may have.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I just want to note for the record, I'm so proud of the cooperativeness of this committee and trying to make sure those with social obligations have a chance to meet them. And
Can
we
we
thank
arrange
both
for
of.
social obligations every time we're coming?
I wish we had more evenings with social obligations here, but no. But again, I thank both the witnesses for appearing, and they're certainly both excused.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I need to talk to you a minute.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else seeking?
Security hearing in the middle of the...
Well, what time does it start? I don't know what time it starts.
We're trying to proceed here. Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H.R. 4468, H.R. 5933, or H. Resolution 88? Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from Indiana, Ms. Houchin.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 4468, the Choice in Automobile Retail Sales Act of 2023 as structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. The rule makes in order only the amendment printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. Each amendment shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. All points of order against the amendment printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report are waived. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 5933, the Deterrent Act, under a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Education and the Workforce or their respective designees. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Education and the Workforce, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill, as amended, shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only those amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. Each amendment shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand of division of the question. All points of order against the amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report are waived. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.J. Res. 88, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5, United States Code, of the rules submitted by the Department of Education relating to, quote, improving income-driven repayment for the William D. Ford Federal Direct Loan Program and the Federal Family Education Loan, FFEL program, end quote, under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the joint resolution. The rule provides that the joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the joint resolution. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Education and the Workforce or their respective designees. Finally, the rule provides 1 motion to recommit.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion. Is there any discussion or amendment to the rule? Hearing no requests for further amendments, the questions on the motion to report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Ask for a roll call.
Roll call's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Rushenthaler. Mr. Rushenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, aye. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, aye. Mrs. Houchin.
Aye.
Mrs. Houchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy.
Aye.
Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon. No. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse. No. Mr. Neguse, no. Ms. Ledger Fernandez. No. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
The ayes have it. The motion report's agreed to. Accordingly, Ms. Houchin will be managing the rule for the majority.
And I was asking Mr. Neguse if he wanted to do it, but I guess, no, I will do it.
Well, without objection, the committee is adjourned.